You're listening to Partnernomics Podcast, where we discuss the art and science of developing successful strategic partnerships. To learn more about the suite of Partnernomics solutions, visit partnernomics.com.
Welcome to the Partnernomics Podcast. Today, we are joined by Mr. Patrick McGalliard. Patrick, thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Mark. Good morning. And a pleasure as always. Always fun to sit and talk shop.
So Patrick and I, we actually had the opportunity to work together, and we've collaborated, man, for a number of years. We won't talk about how many years, but I've always enjoyed getting Patrick's insights whenever we were writing Partnernomics or putting together a lot of our content. Patrick was one of the guys that we roped in to get his take on the content, to share some of his stories.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. And I would say, for me it's been interesting because I think over really the last 10 to 15 years, which spans most of my time doing partnerships, I've seen things just evolve like crazy. And I think especially as technology evolves and you get all of these crazy Lumiscapes out there for all these different industries, it's easy to get lost when you're trying to do it on your own. So I've actually I've found a niche for myself in partnerships and business development, and always really happy to talk about it. Very passionate about the whole topic.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Well, so Patrick, I want you to if you would, take us back to day one. How did Patrick get into Biz Dev? And obviously you love it. You spent, two plus decades in this specialization. But how did you get into Biz Dev? And then kind of give us an overview of your career.
Yeah. So great question. So like everything, it had nothing to do with my plans and was almost an accident. So going back when I started my career, I was hardcore finance and accounting. Actually had an accounting undergrad degree, had an MBA in finance and management, and I was on the track where I was going to be a CFO. And went to work for a major corporation and spent about 6 or 7 years really being groomed. I was in a finance management development program that was rotational. And, it was one of those deals where over 3 years, you have 3 or 4 different rotations in different parts of finance. So I was in corporate audit. I was in international mergers and acquisitions where we were just buying companies. And as I went through that process, it's interesting. I did a 3-year run through that, graduated from the program, rolled out into a finance job, and that finance job was actually supporting a group that was a series of 7 or 8 incubated businesses. And so I began to work side by side with a lot of the types of people who were responsible for setting up new businesses, trying to figure out how to grow new revenue streams, and then ultimately through the support of that team, I got involved in the deals. And the deeper I went into that, the more I realized that it wasn't as much for me the Excel spreadsheet and accounting. It was really the art of the deal. It was all the different moving components, the fact that you had to be exposed to operations, marketing, sales, the financials, and you still had to do it with couth and figure out a way to partner. And so I had that interest. And then at the same company, there was an opportunity to go start really a BD team. And I was one of 6 or 7 folks who were brought over by the same VP who headed this incubator group. He tagged me and said, you need to come over, leave the dark side of finance and come over and do these partnerships, because we're going to be standing up another 6 or 7 businesses. So I was truly, truly lucky from the get-go to be able to be in a finance role that actually supported this type of thing enough to be exposed to it.
That's awesome, man. For some people, I guess it depends on if it's kind of your gig or not. Some people just have that entrepreneurial kind of fire and desire to jump in and to create something from nothing. I guess maybe it's not for all people, but man, if you've got the bug, you've got the bug.
Yeah, totally true. And for me, and so that was, just by way of background, that was at Sprint, was the first role where we did that. And, for me, the biggest evolution, so I stepped into that business development role, and, when you start in BD or partnerships and you don't really know what that means, It was really simple. I mean, I stepped into a situation where this is going back to the Stone Ages of mobile for all the kids out there. I mean, this was, before iOS existed. This was before Android existed. And this was back in a world when, there were flip phones and black and white screens. And we were tasked with, again, the group of 7 of us, we were tasked with trying to create reasons for customers to use their wireless phones for more than just talking. And so if you think about how crazy and how cool that is, now looking back 20 years later, so my first initiative, as an example, was to help establish a games business and to help establish media and entertainment content deals. And so this was starting from scratch. So it was absolutely the right place at the right time, because over a 3 to 5 year period there where we stood up all these services, I got to experience all the different industries that were going mobile back in the day. And again, just as background, remember back then, if you had content or you had a service and you wanted that on a mobile device, you actually worked through the carriers. And so we were in that role of trying to partner first with the games companies. Tons of crazy stories about folks like EA and them not taking mobile as a serious platform. We got to live through that. We got to work with what was referred to then as the portals. So this was Yahoo and Microsoft, MSN back in the day, then Google as they stood up. Then it evolved into the music space. And so as ringtones started, and this wasn't even necessarily the high quality, but just even the low quality, had to work with the music labels and all of the different rights entities that were there to figure out how to create a ringtone on a phone. And it gradually evolved into everything. We worked with the sports leagues as they went mobile. We built the NFL mobile app, so was involved in that negotiation as well. And again, these are all, at the time, they're first of their kind deals and greenfield enterprises. So it was just a fascinating way to get into BD. And I think that variety, the fact that over 3 to 5 years, I was able to have that much variety in what I was exposed to, business models, industries, biases that folks had, where we had the leverage, and other situations where the other party had the leverage because they were the bigger brand. It was an indoctrination to partnerships by fire, for sure.
It was so interesting. So mobile video, right? It kind of evolved into, okay, so we now finally have enough bandwidth where we're going to be pushing some mobile video over. And then that's when you and I had connected back in those days. But yeah, it's one of the things that I love about the BD space as well, is the variety. I mean, one day you're looking at pricing strategies, and then you're talking to legal, and then you're writing and reading contracts, and then it's finance, putting together the deal. You're looking at product. How's the product going to evolve or move? How is this partner going to help you? There is so much variety, I think, for maybe, I think I've got the ADD thing going, but maybe for people with that type of a mindset, it suits them well. And it seems that people, if they love BD, they love BD. That's where they stay.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree with that. And I think, it's interesting because, again, I had all this finance background, and, I had that path and thought that was literally all I was going to do. And then the deeper I got into BD, I think the more I really enjoyed that. And, I always tell even my folks today on my team 20 years later, like the biggest thing when you're doing business development is, I call it living in the squishy. And by that, I mean, no two deals are the same. No two product conversations end the same way with a different partner. You're going to have different variables in each. And so, I think about it. And again, I go back and I just candidly, I was grossly unqualified, when I started, and when the first manager said, "Hey, Patrick, go out and do these deals, and, I want to figure out 8 deals with 8 games providers, go figure out the space." And, literally I'm running out to get a PlayStation or an Xbox and trying to figure out who all the game publishers are. But that's the enjoyable part. Here's the other thing, Mark, that I think is always important in terms of partnerships in BD. I think to be successful, I always say you have to be a jack of all trades and master of none. And I say that as a compliment to our trade, not as a put down, in that I think you have to be well-rounded. And I think if you look at just the BD role, whether it's at a very small startup or whether you're in a situation where I am today, where I'm actually running a division's business development for IBM Watson. Irregardless of which end of the spectrum you fall in, I think the important element is you have to be flexible. You have to have a nose for value. You have to understand the partner perspective. You can't just be a salesperson. You can't just be a marketer. You can't just be finance. You can't just be an ops person. And you can't just be strategy. And so it really does require, I think business development's a really tough role to step right out of school and do. I think you have to have a foundation in one area, and there's no bias. It could be a foundation in sales. It could be a foundation in finance like I had, or in marketing or product. But I think it's the broader view and the skill set where I see business development executives really being successful and staying with it for a long time.
So Patrick, I know you've worked with some startups. You've worked with some big Fortune 50s, Fortune 100s. What company is a good fit for Biz Dev? Or is there such a thing as how can organizations decide if they can utilize the Biz Dev function?
Yeah, so I mean, great question, and I think the answer is always it depends. It depends on the situation and the goals. The one element I would say to companies or leaders who are thinking of establishing, a partnerships team or a business development team up front is to be clear on the goals for business development and what you want to accomplish. So back to your question, just in terms of, hey, what type of company? It can be any, but I think you have to have clear goals and expectations, because you can misalign those goals and throw something at BD. And BD could really, in how you're setting it up, really be a sales team, as an example. And that's something that I see, and I've seen more and more and more. And anybody who checks out a job board anywhere in the world and just does a search on business development jobs will see what I mean. If you read through them, I think probably 6 out of 10 aren't what I would consider true BD. They might be more salesy with a business development title. But if you go back and you think about a company trying to establish something from scratch, perfect for BD. So I've consulted with some startups where they're trying to figure out, hey, should we hire? I've got $500,000 of seed money, and I've got to hire staff and make it happen. Should I throw that money at sales? Throw that money at business development? And in every instance, when I sit down, I said, look, it depends on your goal and the maturity of your product and how sure you are about the success of what you're doing. Some of that's a representative of where they are in the curve of their life cycle. But if they're testing a hypothesis of, is this the right market for us? BD is perfect. If they've already done that and they already have feedback and they already have a specific vertical or channel and they already have a product and there's off the shelf, then you know what? BD is probably not the right fit. Just hire the salespeople if you've done that. Although I'm still biased to keeping BD alongside that, because someday eventually that's going to evolve or go away, that first sales opportunity. And then on the larger company side, I think it's the same thing. I think if you set up your business development team with proper goals and lanes and have the executive support, which is vitally important for the success of a BD organization, I think absolutely BD can exist. And I see that at IBM, right? In my role right now, in that, IBM is a company of between 300,000 and 400,000 employees, but within my division, which is we'll say about 2,000 people or so, our group exists in a vacuum. We don't report in through any organization. We actually report directly to the head executive of the business unit. And that's critical, because in order for us to be successful, I can't be looking at a new line of business, new revenue streams, a new partnership, and be beholden to, let's say, a quarterly sales quota, or be beholden to, let's say, a product team who has a whole different series of goals. I have to take that enterprise view. And when we set these things up at companies large or smaller in the middle, I think the other thing that is a worthy conversation when you're doing this is about how you line up those goals, and whether it's revenue focused, whether it's number of deals focused, whether it's more strategy focused, of figuring out the right channel when you're trying to choose from 10 different potential areas, defining that up front and then setting that goal for the BD team makes it a good experience. And then the flip side of that is when that doesn't exist, when there's ambiguity, when there's lack of support from the top, and I think we've all seen or been involved in those situations, you just see a struggle to be able to try and determine what success looks like for BD.
Yeah, I think it seems of the conversations that I've had when BD teams have gone south, have not worked, and the executives are pretty sorry that they went down that path. Almost inevitably, it's because BD was seen as a subcomponent of a sales team, and they were treated like a sales team, and they were managed like a sales team. And it just, from my humble perspective, it's that the executives don't understand the BD function and how it's different than sales, and how it needs to be treated very different from sales. We actually have other topics and podcasts that touch on that very specifically. But Patrick, I want to ask you, I know you've led a lot of different teams, hired a lot of folks into the biz dev role, but what are some of the key skills, I guess? What are some of the things that you look for whenever you hire and bring people onto your BD teams?
Yeah, so I think there are elements of it that we've hit on, but I think ultimately when I'm looking, and this could be in the middle of a formal hiring process, or this could just be in the midst of working internally and externally, and always having that antenna for, hey, that gal would be really good for BD. The things I'm looking for, first and foremost, you have to be a good communicator, and the reason being is it's extremely critical that. By good communicator, I mean both internally and externally. So internally, in a lot of situations, business development, you have to advocate. You have to go to a series of, let's say 3 to 10 different organizations internally, and really be the cat herder in the middle to bring everybody together around a partnership or an opportunity that you're doing with a third party. And you have to have enough savvy and couth in doing that to recognize that, hey, those individual groups have their own specific goals, and what you're working on right now, which may be for 12 months out, may not even be on their radar, and they're already working like crazy during the week, and you have to figure out a good way to do that and be a good internal partner. And then I think externally, it's super important because, again, you are the face of whatever company you're representing to that company. And because and I'll pick on sales. I've done sales. It's nothing against sales. It's just a different discipline. But if I'm a salesperson and I'm talking to a third party, I can be very transactional. I can be very focused on, hey, I've got this thing. I'm trying to get you to sell it. We both know what the thing is. Maybe we're just going to argue over price. Maybe I'm going to take you out for a round of golf for dinner, and we're going to go have some wine, and we'll figure it out. Business development is much more about listening. And that's the other side of communication, especially externally. It's trying to figure out, okay, what is important to that partner? And then how do I communicate that our perspective as the partnering company, what's important to us, and do so in a manner, and it's cliche to say that it's a win-win, but that's what our jobs are all about. I always say it's the 1 + 1 = 3 in BD. And by that, I really mean it's not about selling a widget or selling a service that already exists. In most instances, it's about you're either selling something that is brand new and trying to figure out the right channel or the right business model, or does it need tweaked based on the market? Those conversations you have to have with a partner, and you have to listen and be able to communicate. And then I think the far and away the most important skill set on the communication line is then coming back to your home base, to that company, to that executive sponsor, to the business, and saying, listen, we've been out, we've talked to 15 different leaders in this space, and here's what we're hearing and here's what we're seeing, and this is why I think we should change what we're doing, this is why I think we should double down what we're doing, or this is why I think we should absolutely scrap it and do something else. And you have to be able to communicate that. So it's a long-winded way of saying communication is important. The other elements, I think it's super critical that you do have exposure to a lot of different elements functionally to the business. I think it can be very helpful to have domain expertise in a certain vertical. Depends on the job. But more than anything, I think it goes back to having to be comfortable with the unknown, because things aren't charted out. It's a very interesting scenario when we sit down and look at our annual goals. A lot of times we don't know what we're going to be working on that year. Sometimes I don't even know a quarter out what my workload's going to look like, because things evolve and you influence that based on conversations. So the flexibility piece, and I think the flip side of that is I've seen people who get really uncomfortable and squeamish when they step into a new BD role, and there's that, hey, we'll figure it out as we evolve conversations, and this look of panic just goes over their face, like, well, what do you mean we'll figure it out, right? And you have to be strong in that confidence with yourself. And I think the very, very last thing is, honestly, you have to have no ego. And that's because in a lot of instances, BD and partnerships, we work in the shadows, even though we are ironically the face of the company to the partner that we're working with. Internally, in a lot of instances, at least in my career, there's a handoff. Right. And there's a handoff, and there's a head of product or an executive who's going to go out and be on stage and announce the deal and be in the Wall Street Journal. And you have to be comfortable that we work best in that background. And I think there are exceptions to that, but for the most part, that's the ilk of the people that I'm looking for, who just want to do the right thing, get the partnership established, make the business grow, and then move on to the next thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Patrick, obviously you've had a very successful career, done a lot of industry and probably even global firsts, those types of deals, some of the companies that you work for. I want to ask you, who are some people that have been influential in your career that maybe mentored you up? And then maybe what's also some advice that some of those folks have given you that stuck with you over the years?
Yeah, so I would go back to, ironically, my first boss out of school, out of college, and I was in a group where, again, back to my finance days, and I showed up for day one of my job, and it was find your computer, find your desk, get your office, that kind of thing. And I'll never forget, my first boss sat me down and he said, "Hey, Patrick, we're gonna line things out for you. Here's we'll go through all the different things you're going to do and all the tactical day-to-day. We'll get to that. But I want to tell you up front that my job as your manager is to help you develop. And really, in a good way, I want to know from day one, here as you start in my group, what you want to do next and how I can help prepare you for that." And so, and he said, that's my view. And the other element of that is, you have to be thinking all the time about your career and how it evolves. And again, I think a plan doesn't necessarily always come to fruition, but I think at least directionally, knowing the types of things you want to do helps set you up for that. So it was influential. It was quite literally my first day in the real world, and hearing that. And that's a piece of advice that I've always kept. And as I've had some fairly large teams and gotten some seniority through the years, like I go back and I steal that advice from him, and I do that with my employees. And I think it just establishes trust, right? It's I know you're going to stay here and you're going to do great work, and maybe you're going to stay at my team for 10 years, maybe you're only going to stay for 18 months, but I can make sure that as we're spending our time together, that I'm developing you and giving you projects and initiatives that at least fit with your interests and goals, and then also match up with your skill set. So, I think that was my experience. And then therefore, if you're coming into either the workforce or BD, I think the elements of advice I'd give are, one, be flexible, but I think the second piece is directionally understand what you're good at, what are your strengths, and how can you build around those. And here's the other interesting thing about teams. I actually like, and I've got a fairly small team right now of directs. I've got about 5 employees who are direct reports, and in each of them, I always try and focus on what is their area of expertise. Yes, everybody's a good athlete because we're a pretty mature business development team, but I've got one guy who really loves the advertising space, right? I've got another guy who has a lot of product experience. I've got another guy who knows everybody in the industry for media and likes to get out and talk to folks. And just understanding that everybody is a go-to person for something, even though you're that jack of all trades, make yourself an expert in one thing functionally or one thing in a domain, and you'll always be that resource, even if you're not defined by exactly that. That's my advice. Find that passion, find that interest, find that thing you're good at, and keep that in every role that you possibly can, and that will change over time, and that's okay.
That's awesome, Patrick. That sounds like some excellent advice. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Partnernomics Podcast. Patrick, I'm looking forward to dragging you into some additional podcasts so we could pull some of your insights and share those with the listeners.
All right. Hey, thanks a lot, Mark. Appreciate the time. Look forward to the next chat.
Partnernomics Podcast is brought to you by Partnernomics. Learn how to leverage the power of partnership. To listen to more episodes of Partnernomics Podcast, visit partnernomics.com.